Hello. So today I'm going to be talking about Mexican Americans and their experience in the Great Depression, as well as the repatriation programs and the mass deportations that took place back in the 1930s. So in 1929, when the economy collapsed and unemployment was spreading throughout the country, Mexican Americans were chosen to be the scapegoats of unemployment. So you had city, state, and even federal officials all deciding to claim that that the removal of Mexican Americans would lead to them fixing this problem. According to the documentary, nearly 2 million were kicked or deported out, and around 60% of that 2 million were actually American citizens, but were simply kicked out because of the fact that they were Mexicans, and they were forced out through many ways, right? Like threats, welfare cutoffs, things like that. And, like officials wouldn't call it deportations or things like that. They use the term repatriation, even though like most of the people, or not most, but like a lot of the people who were deported never even lived in Mexico. And, I remember like someone even described it like as a complete opposite, depatriation, which is, the loss of one's homeland, which I found accurate. The documentary also used some pretty powerful first-hand accounts, right? Like how children were taken by sheriffs with their guns drawn, and whole families were jailed, and people were put on trains, not even being allowed to bring their birth certificate. There was also this one quote that stood out to me, like this slogan from the officials that said American jobs for real Americans, like just basically excluding the Mexican Americans who were born and raised on American soil, but just they completely ignores them. It just kicks them out of the whole group, which is, yeah. The deportations was also fueled by many different things, right? So obviously there was racism, the borders were pretty close, and anti-Mexican sentiments were already pretty strong at that point. So people just had all the more reason, And it also kind of stood out to me how Europeans were excluded from these deportations, just because they were white, and Mexicans were black, or not black, but dark skinned. So they got the priority of the deportations. And, policies that came from this kind of divided families. It caused long-term trauma, it and the worst part was it was hidden away from the history books for like decades, right? Even though organizations like the League of United Latin American Citizens, even though league or organizations like them try to fight against it and like expose the truth, which was just sad that it wasn't already exposed, that they had to hide it because they were that ashamed. Reading it and watching it kind of made me pause a few times, right? Like, I was just astounded that, the people committing these atrocities were, blatantly admitting it, not even trying to argue that it was right. They were just acknowledging it, that it was just because they were Mexican, even though they were American citizens. It was just because they had Mexican descent, and like it hit hard, right? Because I mean, I couldn't even imagine the rage I'd feel, right, if someone were to come to me and my family and say that to me today, like. And that's also another thing, that even though it's like the history of the past, there's a lot of those problems still happen today, which is not good. We're supposed to be learning from the past. That's what history is for, and yet mistakes just keep repeating. History repeats itself, and that's also another connection I made. The personal stories also kind of got to me, right? Because there were stories of 6-year-olds who were jailed, separated from their families, and then sent to whole different countries just because of the fact that they were Mexican, right? Like, it was just sad to hear about, right? Like, it didn't even feel like it was a discussion about the policies. It just felt more like it was straight up trauma you would tell like a therapist, right? Like, it was so messed up. And like another thing that got to me, right, was this one person who didn't want to remember the age they were when this happened, just because remembering made him sad. Like that just like that's some insane trauma to have, especially being so young, just because you're Mexican. Like it's completely unfair. I also talked about this with a few of my friends, and they all agreed with me about how they're seeing very similar things of what ICE is doing today, and what these people were doing back then. Right? How they're separating kids from their families, and you know all these little tactics just to cope, and using all of these names like, what was it, repatriation, just to cover up their racism. We're seeing very similar things, and we all agree, like, yes, at least we can acknowledge that from the past, that we actually read about the racism in our history books, but yeah, we're still not doing anything about it, which I just felt was kind of pathetic from the US, being the land of the free and all that. That's also another thing, right? Like how, the United States of America was built on liberty and pride of the fact that we are the land of the free, and yeah, we're basically a land built on lies and promises that were never fulfilled, just because of a race and racism, stupid little ideologies like that. It kind of just made us all angry, and like me especially, right? Because I take pride in the fact that I'm American. I'm both American and Mexican, and yet the two sides of that both can't really correspond. Not back then and not today, which is depressing of a fact. Anyways, thank you.